Hey everybody, welcome back to Vanta EDC. Today I'm going to be doing a 1 month review of this knife, the Null Voodoo. And yeah, this is the black micarta version with the black bolster and hardware. So yeah, in case you don't know, Null Knives is a relatively new brand designer. Sean Lum is the guy behind Null Knives, and I believe the Voodoo is either his second or third production model. And so if you're interested, unfortunately these are no longer available for sale at the time I'm recording this. But if you're interested in his designs, the pre-sale just opened today. At the time of that I'm recording, it just opened for his like third or fourth production model, the Raikou, which is kind of similar to this in some ways. So yeah, just a PSA in case you weren't in the know on that one. But yeah, so I'll go through some basic specs and then I'll share my experience and opinions on this design. So let's start with the blade. It's a hollow ground M390 blade. It's supposed to be 60 to 61 HRC. The length of the blade is 3.6 inches. The cutting edge is 3.5 inches. The blade stock thickness is 0.14, like 145 thousandths. And yeah, let's see, is there anything else? And this version, the black micarta version, has a stone wash. I think two of them have a hand satin, and then like there's several different finishes depending on which variation you get. But yeah, this version has a stone wash here with some sort of like blasting in the fuller here. So let's see. The overall length of the knife is 8.25 inches. Like for reference, in case you have an Umnums on, the Voodoo is just the slightest bit shorter. Maybe like yeah, it's like barely anything. Maybe a tenth of an inch, eighth of an inch, something like that. So yeah, there's that. But let's see, the handle length is 4.65 inches. The thickness at the widest point minus the clip is 0.54 inches. The handle, the handle and the hardware are both grade 5 titanium, and the pivot is stainless steel. The overall weight of the knife is 4.0 ounces. So those are your specs. Yeah, so in case you didn't see my initial impressions of this knife, the reasons I got it was, I don't know if I mentioned this in the first one, was honestly this is my first like true drop shut frame lock knife. I think before getting this, I think the only frame lock I had was this, the Wee Hyphen, and it's a lot smaller. It just doesn't have it's a smooth action, but I think partially because of the lack of heft in the blade, it just doesn't drop shut the way this Voodoo does, basically. Sorry, well, it caught on the ramp there, but yeah, so it requires very little coaxing, if at all, to close on its own. So yeah, so I really wanted to experience that, and I mean, that wasn't the only reason I wanted this, but that kind of contributed to me choosing to pull the trigger on this. This got great reviews by a lot of the YouTube reviewers when the prototypes were being passed around. And I think one of the more visually stunning elements that makes this knife really stand out is this blade. It's kind of this almost Warncliffe, I guess closer to like a reverse Tanto shape, with this clip, like a clip point tip. But then it's got this harpoon swedge here, which is, very, very striking, I would say. And so, yeah, this blade is just very visually, I would say it's very unique and very visually appealing to me. So that was another reason. And then on top of that, I'm Asian American. Sean Lum, he's Asian American as well. There's very few Asian American designers. Obviously, a lot of the production knives are made in China, but in terms of Asian American designers, there's very few and far between. I think I can think of like Liang Ma. Who else? There's like one other guy. I'm totally drawing a blank right now. I apologize. But anyway, so I thought it'd be cool to own a knife designed by someone of Asian American descent, just because, you know, like the EDC and pocket knife world is very not Asian overall. So yeah, and I think the last thing that made me interested in wanting to try this knife out was the fact that it's made by Riot, which, you know, is arguably the best production, like best quality production knife company in the world, manufacturing company. So, you know, I really wanted to see what all the hype is about when it comes to Riot. So, and I can see that, you know, the more you, if you sit through this whole review, you see that, yeah, I mean, I think the hype is real, at least based off this one experience. So, I'll quickly kind of compare it to some knives. I already brought some knives out here. So, from a visual standpoint, I think this has a lot of similarity to the Hyphen. You can see those blades, right? They're the almost Wharncliffe profile, and they have this very obvious harpoon swedge at the top. And so, you know, this is, I would say these two have some of my favorite blade shapes of any knives that I've seen or own. And so, yeah, obviously the Hyphen's smaller, but this is still hollow ground. It's got the harpoon swedge. It's almost a Wharncliffe. It just is a very visually striking design. So, very similar in that respect. Size-wise, this is only, I think, the second folder that I've had that's a large folder. So, the first being the Mordax, and the Mordax is a little bit smaller, I believe, a little bit shorter. Or actually, wait, let's see. Yeah, just the tiniest bit. You might, yeah, I think you can tell a little bit, but, and then the Umnumzan is just the slightest bit longer, and Umnumzan being like my third largest, or my third large folder that I've owned and carried. So, so yeah, these are some, these are all very slicey knives. I would say of all these, the Voodoo's probably the sliciest, just by a hair bit more than the Mordax. And you know, the whatchamacallit, the Umnumzan when sharp is definitely very slicey, but yeah. So my experience so far with this was after I got it for like, I think the first 2 weeks, this was the only knife I wanted to carry, which I think is, you know, a common phenomenon when you get a new knife typically, but definitely this was a knife that I was just so just satisfied, like it was very satisfying to be able to carry this knife, to be able to just constantly fidget with it, you know, flicking it open, closing it. You know, I think I would say this is the smoothest action I've ever felt on a knife. It does run on bearings, and I mean, on top of that, it's just I don't, you know, I'm sure there's many factors that go into the smoothness of knife's action, but this is the smoothest, fairly definitively, I would say. And yeah, again, I mentioned earlier, like this is the first knife I've owned that's like a false shut. Well, yeah, I guess unless you count the whatchamacallit, that Vosteed gave me to review, which I don't fully count. I don't consider that my own because I'm going to give that away at some point. But yeah, this is like the first like false shut frame/bolster lock knife that I've ever owned. And so that's just been very fun to be able to finally experience that, kind of getting like understanding why people chase after that sort of experience with their knives. And so I think by virtue of that, of how smooth and how false shut the action is, it's very fidgety. I mean, and yeah, just it's very flickable. You know, you have this fuller and you have these thumb triangles here, thumb studs, whatever. And so it's just very fidgety and satisfying. And I mean, I think in some ways, not the best thing about it, but when it comes down to actual cutting performance, this thing is extremely sharp and extremely slicey out of like from the factory. I've not touched this up at all. I haven't done much cutting with this because, you know, in reality, this is I don't know, this is like a very light EDC knife in my opinion, not something that I'd want to do any serious work with. But it's like, you know, like let me get some paper here. Cutting through paper with this is like a breeze. Oh yeah, you see it's starting to shave the edge right there. Oh. So like you can just, like the fact that you can just glide through that like it's nothing. Yeah, this is very it's a very slicey knife. So get this out of here, goodness gracious. So yeah, it's just, that's really fun to be able to just do that. It almost feels like a party trick in a way, just like how slicey it is. But anyway, so yeah, let me get into the details, the things that I really appreciate about this knife. I mentioned before, I think visually the harpoon swedge really stands out, and the overall blade profile, but the swedge, and it's like hollow ground for a swedge, if that makes sense. So you can kind of see the see, I think if I want to do this, is it evident? Oh yeah, kind of. But yeah, it's just it stands out very much. And it also provides this nice little ramp for your thumb when you choke up here, especially on that forward choil there. So it has function to it as well as being visually appealing. And then another thing that I think visually and has a visual appeal and a functional appeal is the thumb triangles in conjunction with the fuller. I think I really am glad that he chose to not just do the studs and not just a fuller, because for me, the easiest and smoothest way to deploy this knife is the reverse flick, kind of catching in the fuller and in front of the studs. Not putting the tip of my finger solely on the studs, which you can do for sure. That's what I just did right there. But in terms of just like ease of deployment, like very quickly sliding your middle finger into that. Into this slot right here is really easy. It's that's just where your finger wants to end up before you end up deploying the blade. And so yeah, I think this is it's a very well thought out and well executed design when it comes to just speed of deployment and ease of deployment. So yeah, another thing is this pivot texture, it doesn't really serve any major purpose, I would argue. Well, except actually I should take that back. If you're for whatever reason big on like the draw cuts and like a pinch grip for draw cuts, you can use that. The pivot is textured on both sides. It's like almost knurled, I would argue. And so then you could really get good purchase friction right there on either side of the pivot. And you put your finger up here on the swedge if you want. So aside from that, the visual kind of contrast between the pivot and the bolster there is really nice. So yeah, there's that aspect of it. And then this is the first bolster lock that I've owned. So it is technically the lock bar is the titanium frame, but notice that this micarta scale sits on top such that what is that? Probably 66% of the lock bar is covered by the micarta, so you're not going to accidentally apply pressure there. Now, obviously, you can still apply pressure to this portion right here from this side if you're not paying attention, but it definitely makes it easier to avoid applying unwanted pressure on the lock bar when say you're trying to deploy or unlock or to close the knife. So yeah. Now the jimping on this knife is really good, I would say. Almost perfect. I think it could have just, I guess you don't have to, but it could have really easily gone all the way up to the swedge almost there. But yeah, it's like, look how you have a lot of jimping here from kind of the top of the handle all the way to probably the first 2/3 of an inch up the spine of the blade here. And so when you're in the standard grip, not using that forward choil, it's a perfect thumb placement for me. And then when I choke up, it's kind of giving some traction to that last knuckle on my thumb there. So it still functions in either grips there. And yeah, one thing that, even though like I don't ever plan on using this for any sort of real heavy duty tasks that are gonna really test the lock strength, the solidity of this is amazing. Like no give at all. And this is actually I've loosened the pivot ever so slightly just to actually get it to this fall shut action, because from the factory it wasn't truly fall shut, but it still has great lockup. Just turning the pivot the slightest bit counterclockwise. So yeah, another thing that's kind of appreciated from an aesthetic standpoint is there's pretty minimal exposed hardware. So on the show side, it's just the 2 scale screws, and then on the lock side, you have the pivot, you have the stud, you have the lock bar insert, and then yeah, both scale screws here. So I believe, I think you may, if you're disassembling the knife, you have to start from this side maybe, because I don't think there's a way to remove this scale without removing the clip, and the clip screws I think are they're I don't know if you can see that right there. Yeah, you can see that right there. The clip screws are internal, so the way you have to get to them is from the opposite side, basically. So yeah, but like from a visual standpoint, it's nice because there's not a bunch of hardware showing, especially on the show side. So that's nice. A big functional thing that's great about this knife are the ergos, just the where the different choils and just curves of this knife are. So notice the profile here. So there's this choil, and then there's this forward like finger choil, which I like because it's a hybrid of the top of the actual handle and then the base of the blade. So it doesn't like take up too much cutting length, which is great. I think it gives you the perfect amount of choke up, not too much, not too little. So, but then the nice thing is like this choil on the handle it's very defined. And so, like with my fingers, which aren't super wide, it provides like the perfect, like this is a strong grip just with my thumb and my index finger because of just how locked in my finger gets in this choil. But then on top of that, resting my middle and my not ring finger, but my fourth finger here, and then they get locked in here, and then I have my pinky kind of clamping in the butt of the handle into my palm, and then this is like just like this is a slight convex and then a slight concave curve there with this, like it's barely a prominence or barely a transition there, but this is just so like not magnetic, but it's just it just this is like a hand melt, like melting your hand handle right here. And then here is almost the exact same. I can choke, like when I choke up, I can get my thumb all the way up to this wedge, finger on my index finger on the forward choil, middle finger in the main choil, and then my fourth and pinky here, with it trapped within that part right there. And so this is also very locked in. So the ergos on this are fantastic. And then the last few things small details, things that I appreciate, the aesthetic of the backspace, where you have these like graduated V's from the base all the way up towards this farther up the handle. So it's like a nice detail. Like it could have easily just been this like blank piece of titanium, but having this, that's I guess in a way like homage to the Voodoo. And then the aesthetic of the clip, it's something that you can kind of easily overlook, but I like it. It's very sleek, which, this overall knife really speaks to me from an aesthetic design language, just because I really like the kind of the blend of like hard lines and kind of organic curves. I think this really strikes that balance well. The last thing I'll mention is, from the factory, it comes with a detent ball ramp on the tang. So let's see if we can catch it in the, where is it? Let me get my flashlight here. So you can see right below like within the knife, of course, but below the tip of my index finger here, see that little divot. So it's a pretty minor detent ball ramp. So I'm actually thinking I'm gonna deepen that at some point with some jeweler's files, just because I'd like to because like right now what happens is if I just barely disengage the lock, the knife catches very quickly. The detent ball catches very quickly on that ramp, so it's like barely any travel from the locked position to getting stopped up on the ramp. So this is where it stops, and then it does take some force to actually to get that detent ball onto the ramp and for the blade to drop. So I mean, the good thing is the blade's heavy enough that if you just if you're closing it and you give it enough of a push on the spine while it's vertical, the blade is almost certainly going to drop, like just like that. So, but it just in other positions, it's nice to not have that the slightest bit of resistance there if you don't want it. So I think I'll deepen that detent ball ramp. We'll see. So overall, this is a really great knife in my opinion. There's very few things that I dislike or that I'd want to change. The main thing, and comes down to a personal preference, truly, is the scales. I don't love. Like I didn't want of the four like main variations, I didn't want carbon fiber because I don't think I really like the feel of carbon fiber. But I also don't love the feel of micarta either. I got some spit right there on the pivot. I don't love the feel of micarta, and I just don't love how uneven the color is. For me, it'd be great if there was just like black titanium scale inlays or whatever scales. Like you could get it'd be great if there was like some texturing on it or whatever. Like that would be ideal for me. So I just don't love the options that are available when it comes to the scales, but that's a personal thing. I'm sure a lot of people love the micarta scales. So yeah, that's a me thing. One really minor thing is, I think I love the logo. I think the logo looks great and whatnot. I think for whatever reason, it just doesn't feel right to put it right here at the crook of the primary bevel here. Like if they were able to get it inside that fuller, I think it would look a lot sleeker personally. I don't think it looks terrible, but just from like I'm very much ascribed to like a minimalist aesthetic, and I think I love that there's basically no branding other than that logo, and then when you close the knife, it says M390 right there, which I love that that's concealed when the knife is deployed. But yeah, like I think it'd be great. Like I totally understand him wanting to have his logo visible when the knife is deployed. Like be proud of your work. Like I get that, but I think it'd be great to like kind of tuck it into that folder there. But yeah, a very very like minor thing, and honestly, I don't think I even feel that strongly about this, but like M390 for this blade, I think it'd be cool to get this in a tougher steel, one that's less prone to chipping. Just because then I would feel more comfortable this because of how thin this hollow grind is. I don't feel comfortable with doing anything beyond maybe like cutting cardboard, if that. Just because because of the steel and the grind. So if it was a tougher steel, like I think MagnaCut and Vanax are tougher, or even S45, one of those steels. I think that would be great, but it seems like Riot doesn't do much non-M390 step work for the most part. I know they do, but it's just very rare, it seems like. So I would assume it's cost prohibitive to the designers to change steels from M390 if they're working with Riot. Okay, a very minor thing, and this might just be my particular knife, but like the whatever the blasting, it's kind of hard to tell with this lighting, but the like blasting or whatever it is that's in the fuller here, it's very uneven, and unfortunately, the lighting doesn't make it super evident. You can kind of tell it's like a little darker kind of the further away you get from the edges, but it's just not super even. So I don't know if that's normal for all these for this variation, or if it's just more so evident on mine. But yeah, that's that. So overall, as I mentioned, this is a great knife. I would not consider this a gentleman's EDC personally. It's kind of large, and honestly a little, I think that blade probably is a little aggressive looking to some non-knife people. So for me personally, I wouldn't categorize this as a gentleman's EDC, although feel free to do that for yourself if you do. It's definitely, as I mentioned, not really a hard use knife in my opinion, but I think this is just the truly great enthusiast knife. Like the execution is done well, the design is the look is very distinct. I think the design is very well thought out. And ultimately the manufacturing, the execution, the lockup, the smoothness of the action, just every little thing that an enthusiast can appreciate is present, I would say, for the most part in this knife. So yeah, this is something that I don't see myself letting go of for a while. Unless of course there's like one with a better blade steel, or different, like at the very least I'd love to get different scales for this. But yeah, even though it doesn't fit like a niche for me in a way, I guess it fits the enthusiast niche. I'm kind of in this process of trying to narrow down my collection and narrow my focus of knives that I want to get towards knives that serve distinct purposes and don't overlap too much. So this one kind of doesn't fit into any of those, except if I kind of allow myself that just general enthusiast niche, which for this knife I think I would do that because it's really that satisfying and just appealing to me. So yeah, unfortunately I mentioned the first production run, they are all sold out everywhere. He didn't really sell them through many dealers. He sold them mainly through his own website. But I'd like to think that with time that he'll do at least one more production run, because these sold out basically as soon as they were available, and the reviews on this knife are just unanimously great. So I apologize to anyone who's watching this lusting after one and doesn't already have one, but I can tell you that this is definitely worth whatever wait that might come when it becomes available to you. I guess money's all relative to people, but don't pay an arm and a leg to buy this. I think I saw a couple on eBay for like $700, which I'm like, no one should pay double for this knife. I mean, but you know, it's your money. Spend it how you want. So it is a great knife, you know. So yeah, hope you found this informative. If you have any experiences with the Voodoo, feel free to throw them in the comments. If you have questions because you haven't had a chance to get hands on this, feel free to, you know, drop them in the comments and I'll try to answer them when I see them. But yeah, until next time, take care. All right, bye.